My name is Nora Callahan, and I'm 41 years old. For 16 years, my family believed I did something forgettable with insurance paperwork in a strip mall office. Then, on a Sunday morning in November, my father sat me down at his kitchen table and asked me to confess to a felony my brother committed. A woman was in surgery with a broken pelvis. My brother had been driving my truck. My mother did the math out loud, the way she always does. He has a campaign, she said. You have nothing to lose. My brother didn't even put his coffee down. He just looked at me and asked who was going to take the word of a claims adjuster over a future congressman. There was already a lawyer at the table before anyone asked me a single question. And they were so confident in the answer that they'd already printed out my confession. What none of them knew. About my job, about what my truck had quietly been recording that whole time, and about the woman who was awake in a hospital bed waiting for someone to finally tell her the truth. Took this family apart, piece by piece, over the next 6 weeks. Welcome back to Untold Secret Hub, where the people everyone underestimated finally get to tell their side. If you've ever been the one your family wrote off, stay with me. Drop a comment and don't forget to subscribe. I drove 5 hours to Millbrook Falls because a 14-year-old asked me to. My nephew Caleb texted me in early October, Grandpa's turning 70. Please come. He added a little wave emoji and that was all it took. I hadn't set foot in that town in almost 4 years. The house looked exactly the way I remembered it, which felt like its own small insult. White shutters my father couldn't really afford. A banner strung above the porch reading Callahan for Congress in the same red as my brother Weston's tie in every campaign photo. Inside the front door, there's a small brass tray on the entry table, and every set of keys in the family goes into it the second you walk in. My mother started that tradition when I was maybe 8 years old. She calls it courtesy. It's really surveillance. I drop my keys in the tray like everybody else. In the hallway, there's a gallery wall of framed photos, and I'm in about a dozen of them. The most recent one is from a law school graduation that happened 16 years ago. After that, the wall just stops including me. Nobody voted to take me off it. Nobody had a meeting about it. I simply became the person nobody thought to photograph anymore, and I'd gotten disturbingly comfortable with that. My father introduced me to a city councilman near the punch bowl. This is our oldest, he said. She does something with paperwork over in Dutton County. The man nodded politely and shook my hand, and I let the description stand, because I always let it stand. Standing there and disappearing had become the one skill this family ever let me perfect. By 11, the party had thinned to the people who never leave first. My brother Weston was still working the room the way he'd been working rooms since he was 17. The kind of face that always knows exactly where the camera is. He'd had a few drinks, more than usual for him, which is saying something. Someone remembered the campaign yard signs were still stacked in the pole barn behind the house, and my mother said it could wait until morning. Weston said it absolutely could not, because volunteers were coming at 7 and it needed to look sharp. That was his phrase. Look sharp. I said goodnight and went up to the guest room, second door on the right, the one with my old David, and a closet full of my mother's out-of-season coats. Sound travels strangely in that house, you can hear the front hall from upstairs. I heard the key tray rattle, that hollow metal clatter, and then the storm door. I read for a while and didn't think much of it. Around 1:45, I heard the garage door groan open, then close. Then 2 voices in the kitchen below. Low and careful, the way people talk when they don't want to wake someone. It didn't sound like a fight. It sounded like planning. When I came down for water sometime after 1, the brass tray in the hallway was completely empty. Not one key in a house with 4 vehicles parked outside. I noticed it the way you notice a picture hanging crooked, filed it away, and went back to bed without thinking about it again. I should have. The morning news came on while I was pouring coffee. A woman had been struck by a vehicle on Route 14 near the grain elevator just before midnight and left there. 48 years old. Critical condition at St. Agnes Medical. Witnesses described a gray pickup truck heading south, and part of a license plate. Then the anchor moved on to a story about a school bond measure. I stood there holding the coffee pot and felt the entire house shift temperature around me. My father had been shut in his study since 6 that morning, which never happens on a Sunday, and I could hear him through the door using the voice he saves for people who owe him favors. Weston didn't come downstairs. My mother said he had a headache. When I went out to grab my bag from my truck, I found her in the driveway in a bathrobe, wiping down the inside of the garage doorframe with a rag. "Pollen's been terrible this year," she said, smiling. My truck wasn't where I'd parked it. I always back in. It was nose first into the space. I walked around the front and found the right headlight housing cracked clean through, a pale smear along the bumper, and the whole panel scrubbed unnaturally clean. Not car wash clean, but scrubbed by hand with a rag at dawn clean. I put my hand on the hood. My mother came up behind me and didn't ask what I was looking at. She just said, "Come inside, Nora." Family meeting. Russ Delaney was already sitting at the kitchen island. He's been my father's attorney since before I had a driver's license, and he taught me to tie a fishing knot on the dock at Pine Lake when I was 10. He had a legal pad in front of him, and an empty coffee cup, which told me everything about how long he'd already been there. They hadn't called a lawyer after talking to me. They'd called a lawyer instead of talking to me. I want you to understand exactly how that conversation went, because it's the whole story in miniature. Nobody asked, "Is she going to survive?" Nobody said the victim's name. They said exposure. They said the next 48 hours. They said, "We need to control the narrative before it controls us." Russ used the phrase, "manageable outcome," twice. My mother refilled everyone's coffee except mine. And underneath all of it, the actual facts assembled themselves in front of me like furniture pulled out of a box. Weston had taken keys from the tray at 11:30. He'd taken my truck because it was the one blocking nothing in the driveway. He'd been drinking since late afternoon. He'd come home just before midnight with a cracked headlight and hadn't called anyone. My mother had made him tea instead. Nobody dialed 911. Nobody drove back out to check. A woman named Diane Petrosky had lain on the shoulder of Route 14 for nearly 20 minutes before a delivery driver found her. Then Russ slid a single sheet of paper across the granite, already typed, already dated. A confession. Mine. It said I had borrowed the vehicle. That I wasn't familiar with the rural roads. That I'd panicked. Someone had put the word panicked in my mouth before 8 in the morning. My mother came around the island and took my face in both hands, and she looked at me with more warmth than she'd shown in years. "Just say it was you," she said gently, like she was doing me a favor. I asked if she understood what she was asking. She said she understood perfectly, and that's exactly why it had to be me. No spouse, no kids, no campaign, a job nobody at that table could even describe accurately. My father didn't look up from the paper. "He has a campaign," he said, like reading a line item. "You have nothing to lose." And there it was. The entire family ledger, spoken out loud, in front of a lawyer, and not one person flinched. Weston finally came down in sweatpants, poured orange juice, and listened while I said no. I said it once, calmly, and then again because the first time didn't seem to register with anyone. Russ suggested we all take a breath. My father said there wasn't time for that. And Weston, leaning against the counter with his glass in hand, looked at me the way you'd look at a dog that had failed a simple trick. He wasn't even angry, which somehow made it worse. "Who's going to believe you anyway?" he said. I picked my jacket off the chair. I made it almost to the doorway. Then my father said one more thing, and it stopped me cold. "Weston already gave his statement this morning," he said. "Your name's in it." I turned around. Russ wouldn't meet my eyes, which told me he'd helped write it. Weston had told the responding officer that his sister was visiting from out of state, that she'd asked about the back roads the night before, that she'd left the house around 11:30. Not an accusation. Better than an accusation. A helpful little detail from a cooperative family. I stood in that doorway and ran the math they were sure I couldn't run. The truck was registered to me. Witnesses saw a gray pickup and half a plate. I'd been alone in a guest room with no one to vouch for me. And whoever got their story to the police first would own the shape of that story. Everyone who came after would just be arguing with it. My father watched my face and mistook what he saw there for fear. It wasn't. It was recognition. I'd spent 9 years as a public defender, standing beside people convicted of things they hadn't done, and almost none of them lost because of evidence. They lost because someone else got there first. I put my jacket back down. Not because they'd won, because leaving Millbrook Falls that morning would have handed them the easiest version of me imaginable, the estranged sister who showed up for one night and bolted. They were operating on a version of me that was 16 years out of date, and it never occurred to a single one of them to check whether it needed updating. That was their first mistake. It wouldn't be the cheap one. I should tell you what happened when I was 26, because it's the foundation the whole house is built on. I failed the bar exam my first attempt. Nearly a third of my class did that year, a footnote in most people's lives. It happened to land 6 weeks before my father's re-election campaign, and a man running for state assembly needs a story that makes him relatable. So at a fundraiser in front of 200 people who sold insurance and fixed tractors, he told them his oldest had gone off to law school and come up short. He shrugged. "Can't win 'em all," he said, and the room laughed warmly, and he got exactly the humility points he needed. My mother stood beside him. Afterward, in the parking lot, I asked how she could let him say that. She straightened my collar, gentle about it, which is the part I remember most. "We don't do truth in this family, honey," she said. "We do versions." I passed the bar that February. I never told them. I moved 300 miles away and took a public defender job, and I learned something my first year that I mistook for wisdom for the next 15. If you never tell people anything, they can't take anything from you. So I stopped telling them things. I stopped correcting the paperwork joke. I stopped sending updates. When I was sworn onto the federal bench years later, I buttoned my own robe alone in an empty room because I hadn't invited a single person who shared my last name. I told myself the silence was dignity. It took a woman bleeding on the shoulder of Route 14 to show me what it actually was. By Sunday afternoon, the county sheriff had handed the case to the state police, because Diane Petrosky had gone from critical to still critical, and whoever did this was facing a felony regardless. A detective named Carla Voss called the house to say she'd be scheduling interviews with everyone present that night. My father took the call in the hallway with his hand cupped over the receiver. Russ came back that afternoon with a cleaner draft of my statement. Panicked replaced with became disoriented. "And set it on the coffee table with no rush," he said. Though he mentioned the DA's office would want something by the following Thursday, which is a rush dressed up as patience. I went out to the porch and called a woman named Priya Anand, an attorney I'd faced across a courtroom a decade earlier and never forgotten. I told her everything in about 4 minutes. She asked 2 questions: had I said anything to any investigator, and had I touched my truck? No, and only the hood. "Good," she said. "Don't touch it again and don't be alone with any of them. I'll be there Tuesday." I sat on that porch afterward and looked at my truck at the end of the driveway with its cracked headlight, and I thought about the one thing in that vehicle none of them knew existed. It had been quietly recording since the moment someone turned the key, and the problem, the entire problem for the next month, was that I couldn't just go get it myself. People think a modern truck is just a truck. It isn't. It's a silent witness that never blinks and doesn't care who's paying for the fuel. Mine's a 2022, and it does 3 things most people never think about. It ties the driver profile to the key fob, so mirrors and seat position shift automatically to whoever's holding it. It logs every phone that pairs to its Bluetooth, and it has an event data recorder that wakes up the instant the crash sensors register a hard enough impact, saving several seconds on either side. Speed, braking, steering angle, throttle. Monday morning I sat in the passenger seat with the door open, 1 foot still on the gravel, and turned on the display without touching anything else. Driver profile guest. Seat position 4 inches forward of where I always keep it. And in the list of paired devices, 1 entry that hadn't been there Friday morning. Weston's iPhone, connected 11:31 p.m., disconnected 11:58 p.m. I sat with that for a long moment, then turned the screen off, closed the door, and didn't remove a single thing from that truck. I need you to understand why, because it's the most important decision in this whole story. I sit on a federal bench. I have thrown out evidence for less. If I pulled that data myself, as the very person they were trying to pin this on, every hour of it becomes a referendum on my own hands. At breakfast, Russ mentioned casually that the family would take care of the headlight. A shop in Dutton could fit it in Wednesday. I said that was thoughtful. Then I went upstairs and called my insurance carrier and told them, in the flattest voice I own, that my vehicle may have been involved in an incident while in the possession of another driver, that liability was unclear, and that I wanted a claim opened and the vehicle preserved, as is pending investigation. 11 minutes. The adjuster placed a hold on the truck before lunch. No repair shop within 3 counties touches a vehicle under an open claim with a preservation hold because they don't get paid and they do get sued. Nobody had to say no to anyone. There was simply, from Monday afternoon forward, no way to fix that headlight, no way to detail that interior. No way to slide that seat back 4 inches. It was the most boring thing I did that whole month, and it may have been the most important. My father found out Tuesday when the shop called Russ to cancel the appointment. He didn't bring it up at dinner. He just passed me the potatoes and asked about my drive up, and he looked at me half a second longer than a person usually looks at their daughter. I've spent my career watching people recalculate across a bench. You can see it happen in real time. Something they'd filed under settled quietly sliding back into the open column. He was starting to wonder whether the daughter he'd written off in a parking lot 16 years ago was actually the person sitting across from him now. He didn't ask. Asking would have required believing there was something worth knowing. Wednesday, I drove to St. Agnes and sat in the surgical ICU waiting room for 2 hours in the corner, telling no one who I was, because I wasn't anyone there and had no business being anything else. Diane Petrosky's husband, Marcus, sat by the window with a crossword book he never opened. A nurse came to update him, and he did what everyone does with medical staff. Tried to turn a patient back into a person. He said Diane taught 3rd grade for 22 years and had never once raised her voice at a kid who didn't deserve it. He said their car needed brakes. $600 they'd been saving toward, and that Diane had decided in September she'd walk to the school and back instead. Put the money away. That's just how she operated. She decided things, and then she simply did them. She's got reflective gear. He told the nurse. She always wears the reflective gear. He said it twice, like it was an argument he needed to keep winning. On the corkboard near the vending machine, pinned between a blood drive flyer and a church bulletin, was one of my brother's campaign postcards. His practiced smile, the red, and beneath it the slogan his consultants had tested in July, "A voice you can trust." I looked at it for a while. Then I bought a coffee Marcus hadn't asked for, set it beside him, and left before he could ask my name. Thursday, I went to see Russ alone at his office above the pharmacy, because there was still a version of the world in my head, where a decent man had gotten swept into something, and just needed one honest conversation to find his footing. He has a photo on his wall of himself, my father, and 2 other men holding up a stringer of bass at Pine Lake in 1997. I'm in the corner of that photo, 10 years old, holding the net. He poured me coffee in a chipped mug and I told him everything. Not as a suspect, not as a colleague, just as the kid who used to hold his fishing net. He listened the way he used to when he was teaching me a knot, nodding along, letting me finish. When I got to the end, he set his cup down. "Sign the statement, kiddo," he said, and he meant it kindly. He said the DA would likely offer something reasonable. No priors. Probably a deferred sentence, 18 months and it's paperwork. "It's the version that saves everybody," he said. The man who taught me to tie a bowline was quietly explaining why I should take a felony for my brother, and he genuinely believed he was being generous. On the desk between us sat a legal pad, and clipped to the top, a memo slip with a letterhead I recognized immediately from 100 filings in my first year of practice, the office of the Dutton County District Attorney, Alan Truitt, my father's very first campaign volunteer, class of 1991. Priya arrived that Tuesday and took a room at the Highway Motel. The afternoon I got back from Russ's office, she made me say the whole thing out loud again, while she took notes in handwriting I couldn't read upside down, which I suspect is intentional. Then she laid out exactly where I stood, and it was worse than I'd let myself admit. The moment I pulled anything from that truck myself, I became the accused party handling my own evidence, and any competent defense attorney turns the entire hearing into a conversation about my hands. 2. The ordinary channel for all of this, the DA's office, was run by a man who'd been at my father's side since before I could vote, And a file can sit in a drawer like that for a very long time without anyone technically breaking a rule. 3. And she was careful here. I hold a federal judgeship, which means I don't get to be clever. Not one phone call to anyone I know. Nothing said to a reporter, ever. Nothing that could ever be characterized as a judge leaning on a local case. Every ordinary advantage a person in trouble might have, I had to surrender at the door. So I have the truth. I said. No way to move it. She kept writing. Data gets challenged constantly, she said. Chain of custody, tampering claims, spoliation arguments. I've fought that battle and won it before. Then she said the thing I've turned over every week since. But sooner or later, this case is going to need your face, Nora. A witness under oath is a different animal entirely. Oh, my face. The one thing I'd spent 16 years keeping out of every frame in that house. We did it on a Friday afternoon in a strip mall parking lot in Dutton, because Priya wanted concrete, cameras, and a business address in the record. She'd hired a forensic technician named Sophia Reyes out of the capital, who brought her own equipment, her own chain of custody paperwork, and a phone mounted on a tripod that ran the entire time. Priya narrated it like she was reading a grocery list. Date, time, location, VM, odometer. Sophia photographed the headlight, the bumper, the seat rails, the paired device list, everything, before touching a single component. Then she pulled the module and the storage card and held them out to me on an open palm. I stood in that parking lot holding the entire night of October 8th in one hand for about 10 seconds. It weighed nothing. Sophia asked if I wanted to review the contents before sealing it. I said no. Priya's eyebrows lifted a fraction, which from her is practically a gasp. If I watch it first, I said, then every answer I give from now on is an answer I've had time to shape. And one day someone's going to ask me under oath whether I saw it before I testified, and I want the answer to be no. Sophia sealed it in a paper evidence bag. Red tape across the flap, signed and dated. Priya signed beneath her. It went into a locked case in the trunk of a rental car. I didn't know what was on it. I only knew what my truck had been awake for that night. And Route 14 wasn't the only thing it remembered. If you've made it this far, you already know this story was never really about a truck. It's about who your family decides you are, and what happens the moment you refuse to agree with them. If you've ever been filed away as the disappointment, tell me in the comments. I read every one. Now let me tell you what my mother did next, because she waited for exactly the right moment, and she is frighteningly good at this. Sunday there was a dinner. Not a family meeting, a real dinner. With the good china and pot roast with pearl onions, which I'd loved since I was 6 and hadn't been served in that house in over a decade. My mother had pulled out the photo albums. Caleb was allowed to stay up late. My father asked about my casserole and actually listened to the answer. Weston passed the rolls and complimented my haircut. It was the warmest room I'd sat in with these people in 15 years, and every degree of it was calculated, and knowing that did almost nothing to protect me from feeling it. After Caleb went up to bed, my mother laid her hand flat on the table and made the offer. Russ had spoken with Alan. A plea to a reduced charge, no jail time, community service, a deferred judgment that seals after 18 months. Then, softly, looking straight at me, she added the part she'd been saving. And you'd be part of this family again, Nora. Really part of it. Holidays. Caleb's graduation. All of it. 16 years I'd stood outside that window, and my mother had finally cracked the door open, and the price on it was a felony and a woman in a hospital bed. The terrifying part wasn't the offer itself. Better manipulators than her have tried on me in worse rooms. The terrifying part was sitting there with the pot roast, feeling how much of me still wanted it, and understanding for the first time that they'd always known exactly how much. Diane Petrosky woke up on the 16th. I heard it from a nurse's aide who recognized me from the waiting room and assumed I was a cousin. She'd come through her second surgery. They'd set the pelvis with hardware. And on the 20th, they got her standing for the first time. I was down the hall when it happened. 2 physical therapists, a walker, and a woman trying to cross 8 feet of tile. It took her nearly 5 minutes. When she made it to the chair, she said something I couldn't hear, and both therapists laughed, and Marcus stood in the doorway with his hand pressed over his mouth. My father had told me I had nothing to lose. I sat in that hallway and counted everything Diane Petrosky had already lost. 2 years of standing in front of a classroom, gone for good. Doctors saying she'd likely need a cane permanently. $600 for breaks she'd been saving toward while walking to work in the dark. 20 minutes alone on a gravel shoulder. And in the waiting room on my way out, the television bolted to the corner showed my brother at a podium outside the county building, navy suit, saying his family was cooperating fully with the investigation and that his heart went out to the Petrosky family during this difficult time. He'd found exactly the right catch in his voice. I've watched a lot of people testify. I couldn't have told you it was fake by looking at him. The press conference wasn't a defense. It was a frame going up around a picture that hadn't been painted yet. 2 days later, the Millbrook Gazette ran a piece, and buried in paragraph 11 was a line attributed to a source close to the family. The vehicle belonged to a sister who'd been estranged from the family for years and had been going through a difficult time. 3 technically true facts, arranged into a person, estranged, out of state, struggling. I read it in a motel parking lot and felt something I hadn't felt since I was 26. The specific vertigo of watching people who share your last name construct a version of you that will always travel faster than the truth ever could. That evening, Caleb texted me for the first time in a month. He's 14. Aunt Nora, did you really do it? Nobody will tell me anything. I sat on the edge of that motel bed and typed and deleted 6 different answers. Part of me wanted to hand him the whole ugly truth. That his father had been drinking since afternoon, had left a woman bleeding on a roadside, had let his sister's name go into a police report. Every word would have been true. And I would have been doing to him exactly what my father did to me at that fundraiser in 1996. So I wrote, I did not. I promise I'll tell you the whole thing when it's over. Then I put the phone face down, because when I finally told that kid the truth, I wanted it to be provable, not just believable. Those are 2 very different things. I drove home for one day that Wednesday, and it was the loneliest 24 hours of the entire ordeal. I went to see the circuit's Judicial Ethics Counsel, a careful, quiet man named Otis Grant, and self-reported before anyone could discover anything on their own, which is the only move that has ever worked in the history of this kind of trouble. I told him a member of my immediate family had implicated me in a state criminal matter, that I was likely to be called as a witness, and that I intended to fully cooperate. He wrote it all down and gave me the rules, the ones I already knew and had been quietly hoping he'd soften. No identifying myself by title in connection with any of it, no contact with the DA's office or state police except as a private citizen through counsel. No public statements, period. If a reporter calls, I say nothing, you understand, he said. This means you'll have fewer options than an ordinary person, not more. I understand, I said. Before I left the courthouse, I stood in my dark chambers for a minute. My robe hung on the back of the door where it always does. 2 years I'd worn it, and it had never once made me feel like the person my family believed I was. It had only ever felt like something serious I'd borrowed and had better take care of. I locked the door and drove back to Millbrook Falls with 1 suitcase and no title at all. Whatever came next, I'd be facing it as nobody in particular, which, luckily, was the role this family had spent my whole life training me to play. Thursday came, and I didn't sign anything. There was no scene. I sat in my mother's living room and said plainly that I wouldn't be signing. My father folded his newspaper and said, "I'll write." That was the entire conversation. Then the house began closing itself off, one polite room at a time. Friday, my mother mentioned her sister was coming through and would need the guest room, so I moved to the Highway Motel, 40 rooms and a waffle iron with a view of the water tower. Monday, a letter arrived on Russ's letterhead, addressed to Priya. His firm represented the Callahan family. Any suggestion that Weston Callahan had operated the vehicle was, the letter said, contradicted by the family's collective recollection. And then, in a sentence that took me 3 reads to fully absorb, the family would, if necessary, describe how the vehicle had been made available to another driver that evening by its owner, with knowledge of the circumstances. There it was. If I wouldn't be the driver, they'd make me the person who handed the keys to a drunk relative. Same felony neighborhood, softer paperwork, my name in it either way. That afternoon, Detective Voss called and asked if I could come in Wednesday morning to the state police post in Kettering. She said it in the flat way people say things they've already decided how to say. Bring counsel, she added. I hung up and sat on the edge of that motel bed and understood I'd been formally moved into a category. The state police post in Kettering is brick, with a flag out front and a vending machine that only takes exact change. Priya met me in the lot. Detective Voss is about 50, with the specific patience of someone who's been lied to professionally for 20 years and stopped taking it personally around year 7. She opened with 2 things I hadn't expected, and they changed the shape of the month. First, 11 days earlier, the state police had gone directly to the manufacturer with a warrant for my truck's telematics. Their own copy of the paired device log and crash data, pulled straight from company servers, with nothing to do with me or my hands or my sealed bag at all. There had been a second door this whole time, opening on its own. Second, my brother's statement had a hole in it. He'd claimed the household went quiet after 11, but a neighbor's doorbell camera across the road had caught headlights coming down the Callahan driveway at 11:29 and returning at 11:56. And Weston had placed himself upstairs, asleep for all 27 of those minutes. Then Voss asked me to walk through my night. I did plainly. The tray, the stairs, the book, the garage door at 1:45, the voices, the water, the empty tray. No adjectives, no conclusions. After 10,000 witnesses, you learn the honest ones are boring and the liars are vivid. At the end, she flipped back a page, paused, read something twice, then looked up. One more question, she said. Occupation? I hadn't planned this moment. There was no strategy behind it. She'd asked a routine question off her intake sheet. And you answer investigators truthfully or you don't answer them at all. There's no honest middle ground. United States District Judge, I said. The room went very quiet. Priya looked at the table. Voss didn't speak for about 4 seconds, which is a long time in a small room. Then she wrote it down. She asked which district. I told her. She wrote that down too. Her one follow-up was a good one. Why wasn't this in the file already? Because nobody asked, I said. She closed the folder, walked us to the door, and shook my hand. Thank you for coming in, Your Honor. My mother was in the lobby. She'd driven over on her own, telling no one. To sit in a plastic chair near the vending machine and be helpful and available, and find out what was being said about her family. She'd heard all of it from 6 feet away. I watched her face do something I've seen 1,000 times from the bench and never once from her. Not pride. Pride looks different. Recalculation. The precise expression of someone moving an asset out of the liabilities column and trying to figure out fast what it might be worth. She said my name once. I kept walking. In the parking lot, Priya asked if I was all right. I stood there with my keys in my hand and said, "Who's going to believe me, anyway? Let's find out." Word got back to the house within the hour. My father called that evening and asked me to come by. We talked on the porch with the door shut and the bug light humming. I'd braced myself the whole drive over for anger, humiliation, maybe even one sentence about wishing he'd known sooner. My father was delighted. He sat down and said, "Remarkable," twice, and then he started working the angle out loud. Did I understand what this changed? A federal judge who steps forward and takes responsibility for a tragic accident. Who doesn't hide behind her position? He said it could be reframed within a week. He said Alan could be brought along. He said the story stopped being a family shielding a candidate and became a family of public servants. And Weston's numbers would go up, not down. Because voters forgive a family that owns its mistakes. He'd found a way to spend my judgeship. 16 years of not knowing what I even did for a living. And within 1 hour he'd run a full appraisal. The answer was that I was worth more to him, as a confession with a title attached, than I'd ever been worth as a daughter. I sat on the porch rail and let him finish. That was the moment I stopped hoping, not the kitchen, not the letter, not the leak to the paper. Hope, it turns out, is the last thing they take from you, and they don't even take it on purpose. They just say exactly what they think out loud, and then it's simply gone. 2 things happened that week. Tuesday, DA Alan Trout told the Gazette his office had reviewed the matter, that the evidence didn't yet establish who was operating the vehicle, and that no charges would be filed at this time. He used the word tragedy and the phrase grieving community, and Diane Petrosky was very much alive, and nobody at that paper thought to ask about her. Thursday, Russ filed his supplemental letter. 4 members of the Callahan family were prepared to state that I had knowingly made my vehicle available to my brother that night, aware he'd been drinking. 4. My father, my mother, my brother, and, because they needed a 4th, my Aunt Denise, who had gone to bed at 9 o'clock that night and slept through the whole thing. Priya laid it out for me over coffee at the diner by the motel. The state had a strong file, but state cases get prosecuted by the county DA, and the county DA had just publicly announced he wasn't prosecuting anyone. The only thing that overrides a man like Alan Trout is a record so clean and so public that not charging becomes more expensive than charging. Sworn testimony, on record, from the one person in that house whose account contradicted the other 4 and had nothing to gain by giving it. It has to be you, she said. But it has to be in the open. Or it doesn't happen at all. Which is when I finally understood the shape of the whole month. There was exactly one door left, and it only opened from the inside. Let me pause here, because I want you to sit with the question I had to sit with that night. If telling the truth cost you your entire family, not one bad holiday, all of it, permanently, would you still tell it? Don't answer too fast. Put it in the comments. I'll tell you what I chose in a minute, and what it cost me. And if you're new here, subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this ends. She came to the motel on a Sunday night, alone, hood up, no phone in her hand. I'd never in my adult life seen my brother's wife with nothing in her hands. Wait, no. It was Weston himself, in an old hoodie, having driven his own car and parked it around the side by the ice machine. I let him in, and for about 10 minutes he was a person I'd never met before. He talked about being 17. About the summer his friends went to the shore, and he went to a media training session downtown, because our father had pulled a favor to get him the slot. About learning to hold a smile through a photographer's 3rd and 4th attempt. He said that when he got a C in economics in 11th grade, our father didn't speak to him for 5 days, and he said it the way you'd mention the weather. Then he looked up. Do you know what it's like being this family's only investment? I did actually. From the other side of it, he never apologized. That's the part I need you to hear. In that entire conversation, he didn't say Diane Petrosky's name once. Didn't ask how she was healing. Didn't express regret for anything except his own position. What he'd come to do was negotiate. Take the plea, he said. You're strong enough to survive being the disappointment. You've been doing it for years. I'm not built for that. For about a minute, I could see the brother I might have had if this family had been in any other line of work. Then he stood to leave. Caught his reflection in the window on his way past, straightened his collar, and the campaign switched back on in his face like a light flipping. They set the final meeting for Wednesday, 11 a.m., in the conference room above the pharmacy. Everyone came. My father in a blazer. My mother with her purse in her lap. Weston straight from a radio interview, still wearing his lapel mic clip. Aunt Denise. Russ at the head of the table with a folder, and inside it, the 3rd version of my confession, and beside it, square on the wood, a black pen with the cap already off. I've thought about that pen a lot since. He'd uncapped it before I even walked in. The gesture of a man who has never once been told no in that particular room. Priya sat down and opened her briefcase. I picked the pen up. I want to be honest with you. I held it. I actually held it. Then I set it down, pushed it a few inches away, and said no in a voice I didn't have to raise. Then Priya started reading. At 80:40 that morning, we had filed a sworn affidavit with the State Attorney General's office describing everything I've just told you. The tray, the keys, the seat, the paired device, the garage at 1:45, the kitchen island meeting, the typed statement. Attached to it, a formal request for a special prosecutor, on the grounds that the county DA had a documented 29-year political relationship with a person of interest. Attached to that, a chain of custody affidavit from Sophia Reyes and a transfer receipt for one sealed evidence bag, delivered that same morning to the state police post in Kettering. My father said my name once. My mother said it 3 times, in 3 different registers, all the way to the door. Sharp, then soft, then the one she used when I was small. I didn't turn around. 16 years I'd been the quiet daughter of the Callahan family, and she died in that doorway on a Wednesday morning, and I left him sitting at that table with his pen. That night, something slid under the door of room 14. An envelope, no stamp, my mother's handwriting, no letter inside. Just a photograph of me at 7 years old on the porch steps, holding a barn cat we'd had for a couple of years. On the back, in ballpoint kitchen, tomorrow 9 a.m. come alone please. She'd underlined please. So I sat at that island a second time, same seat, same coffee. And my mother finally told me what she'd never told anyone. On the night of October 8th, she hadn't gone to bed. She'd stayed up because there were still people in the yard, and a rental van in the drive. And she was in the front room when the garage door went up at 1:45. She met Weston in the kitchen. His hands were shaking too badly to get the tea bag out of the box. She went through the mudroom, stood in the garage, saw the crack in the headlight and the pale scrape, and came back inside and quietly emptied every set of keys from the brass tray into her cardigan pocket. Not so no one could drive, but so that by 7 the next morning, nobody would be able to say for certain who'd been where. She'd known since 11:58 that night. She'd known when she wiped the doorframe. She'd known when she poured Russ's coffee. She'd known when she took my face in her hands and told me to just say it was me. I asked why she was telling me now. She reached across the granite, took my hand, and she was crying and completely composed at the same time, and I understood she hadn't come to confess. Confession requires regret. She'd come to negotiate. The hearing was the next morning at 9:30. She had about 18 hours, and she used every one of them well. Because my mother is the best strategist in that entire family, and the proof is that nobody outside it has ever heard her name. She didn't threaten me. Didn't mention the affidavit or the letter or the newspaper. She just held my hand and made me an offer. The only one in 16 years that ever had a real chance of working. Come home, she said. Not for one dinner. Come home holidays. Caleb's graduation. Your father will put your picture back up on that wall himself. Everything you've wanted since you were 26, and you know it and I know it. Then, almost tenderly, all you have to do is not be quite so certain, tomorrow. She wasn't asking me to lie. She was too smart for that. Lying under oath is prosecutable. She was asking me to be uncertain. To say I couldn't be sure of the time, that I'd been asleep, that it had been a long day. Nobody could ever touch me for that. Diane Petrosky would go home with a cane and an insurance settlement. Weston would be in the state legislature by spring. And I would get my family back. She finished with the line she'd taught me in a parking lot when I was 26, turned around now into a gift. Pick the version where you still have a family. Sweetheart. I looked past her shoulder at the wall of photographs that stopped the year I turned 26, and I gave her my answer in one sentence. Then I told her I'd loved her, because it was true, and because I wanted it on the record between the two of us. Then I left. The Dutton County Courthouse is limestone, built in 1908 with a handrail that wobbles on the third step. At 9:20 the next morning, there were 2 television cameras from the Capitol and 3 reporters waiting at the bottom of the steps. They knew by then. Someone at the Gazette had traced the special prosecutor filing. The morning headline had the word judge in it, in capital letters, right beside my last name. Forever. A reporter got a microphone near my face and asked if I had any comment about my brother. No comment, I said. She asked if I was there in an official capacity. I'm here as a witness. She tried once more about the family. No comment. I said again, and went up the steps and through the doors and didn't stop. And there is no footage anywhere of me saying anything else about any of it. That was the entire strategy, and it cost me more than everything else in this story combined. My father had told me I had nothing to lose. He was right, in a way he'd never once bothered to examine closely. I had nothing they'd ever counted as valuable. My name, my oath and my spine, and I was about to spend all 3 in one morning. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old radiator dust. In the front row, in a wheelchair with a cane across her lap, sat Diane Petrosky, Marcus beside her. The special prosecutor, a man named Devin Achebe, had been appointed 8 days earlier and had a gift for asking short questions. I was sworn in at 10. I sat in a wooden chair beneath a ceiling fan that clicked once every rotation, and I told it in order. The tray in the front hall. The keys going in at 4 that afternoon. The wine at the party. The yard signs in the pole barn. The stairs, second door on the right. The rattle of the tray. The storm door. The garage at 1:45. The voices. The empty tray at 1 a.m., the morning news, the rag on the doorframe, the crack in the headlight, the seat, 4 inches forward, the paired device at 11:31 p.m. The lawyer already seated at the island. The typed statement with my name on it, and the word panicked, later changed to became disoriented. I didn't editorialize once. Sophia had testified before me and entered the sealed bag into the record. Red tape, signature, date. Opened in front of the clerk. Matched line for line against the manufacturer's telematics the state police had pulled independently. Weeks before I ever handed anything to anyone. Then Weston's attorney stood for cross, and he was good, and he went exactly where I would have gone. He asked how an entire family could possibly fail to know their own daughter sat on the federal bench. He asked it twice, with just the right amount of disbelief, turning toward the gallery so the room could appreciate how absurd it sounded. He wasn't wrong that it was absurd. I let the fan click twice. Because I helped them not know. For 16 years, I said. I made it easy. That's my share of this counselor, and I've finished paying it. He asked me to clarify. Behind him, at the defense table. My brother had started talking to his attorney under his breath. Here's something I've learned in 11 years around courtrooms. People trained for cameras make the worst witnesses alive, because a camera never interrupts you, and a courtroom does nothing else. His attorney told him to sit down. He didn't. He stood at the defense table in his suit, hands out, palms up. The gesture he used to close every stump speech, and started to reframe. He said this had been twisted into something it wasn't. He said his sister had been estranged for years, and there was context the court wasn't hearing. He used the word narrative out loud, in a courtroom, which you can only do if you've never actually spent time in one. The judge warned him twice that he'd have his opportunity. On the third try, he finally finished the sentence he'd been circling for 6 weeks, at full volume, in a room with a court reporter typing every word. It's one mistake. People like her get to fail their entire lives, and it costs them nothing. I don't get even one. Nobody moved. Diane Petrosky looked at the floor. In the third row. My mother put her hand over her mouth, and to this day, I don't know whether it was for the daughter at the defense table or the daughter in the witness chair. Then the judge ruled, and it was over in the flat, administrative way these things actually end. Probable cause found. Bound over for trial. Conditions of release modified. Passport surrendered. A subpoena issued that same afternoon to Margaret Callahan regarding the handling of a set of vehicle keys on the night of October 8th. I sat in that wooden chair while the room emptied, thinking about my brother asking who'd believe me, under oath, with the truth and a technician's signature sealed across an evidence bag. Everyone Weston. That's the entire point of the building. He took a plea in February. Felony leaving the scene of an accident involving serious injury. 90 days in the county jail, 3 years probation, restitution. License suspended for 18 months. He withdrew from the race in a statement that ran 90 seconds and thanked his supporters. Russ Delaney is currently under investigation by the state bar over his role in preparing a statement for an unrepresented party, and he hasn't written to me. And I don't expect him to. Alan Trude announced in the spring he wouldn't seek re-election and took a position with a firm in the capital handling municipal finance. My parents were never charged. Akibi looked hard at it and told Priya the truth, proving what my mother did with a set of keys inside her own house, passed a jury. Wasn't a case he could realistically win. I want to be honest about how that sat with me. Badly for about a month. Then it stopped. A courtroom is a narrow instrument, and it was never going to give me what I actually needed. By spring, I understood what I actually needed had already happened in a doorway above a pharmacy. The party slotted a county commissioner into Weston's spot by March, and he's doing fine. My father still has his usual table at the Rotary breakfast. Nothing got cleansed. That's not how any of this works. Diane Petrosky went back to her classroom part-time in the fall, 3 days a week, on a stool her students helped decorate. The civil settlement came through in spring. Not enough, and more than she'd have gotten otherwise. She fixed the brakes on the car. Then she bought Marcus a telescope he'd wanted for years. Otis Grant closed my ethics file in March with a 2, Line memo, judge served as a fact witness in a family matter. No conflict, no violation. On the shelf in my chambers, where most judges keep a family photo, there's now a picture of a woman in a cardigan standing outside an elementary school, leaning on a cane, one hand raised in a wave. I stop by whenever I'm in the county for paperwork. She always insists on paying for my coffee. In May, Caleb texted me. Mom says I'm not supposed to text you. But nobody will tell me what actually happened. I typed for a long time, then told him the truth, all of it, in the plainest language a 14-year-old could carry. I didn't make either of his parents into monsters, and I didn't make them innocent either. He wrote back, thank you for saying it straight. Nobody ever says it straight. There's one more thing, small, and it's the real reason I'm telling you any of this. In June, a new law clerk started in my chambers. 23, nervous, very serious about how she made the coffee. In her second week, out of nowhere, she asked if I had family nearby. A year earlier, I'd have said no and let it drop, the way I let everything drop for 16 years, and she'd have filed me away as private and been entirely right to. Instead, I heard myself say the whole true sentence out loud. No. My family's 5 hours away, and we're not in contact, because my brother hurt a woman with my truck and my parents asked me to take the charge, and I testified against him. She didn't know where to put her face. I told her that was fine, that most people don't know what to say, and they don't have to. Then we went back to the motion calendar. My mother was right about one thing, and I've decided to let her keep it. Families do run on stories. That part's true. I'm just done telling versions. If your family only loves the version of you that stays convenient, that was never love to begin with, and the day you stop auditioning for it is the day the rest of your life is finally allowed to start. That's my story. One empty brass tray, one sealed evidence bag, and one signature I never gave. If someone in your life has you filed away as the disappointment, hear me, you don't owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. Not at Thanksgiving, not ever. If this one stayed with you, send it to somebody who needs it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.